Hello and welcome to Equipped. We have been away for a while now and this is our first episode in 2025. Hope you had a good festive season and a happy new year so far. Today we are going to be talking about an interesting topic of individual differences and personality. Now you may have come across some of these assessments in your own personal professional lives, but there's a lot to be said about it. So we thought we'd just have a little conversation and dive into a few of the models, a few of the theories that sit behind some of this, and just have a look at what is personality profiling? What is this kind of individual differences, preferences, abilities, traits? What are we talking about? Cliff, what should we talk about today?
Really keen to dive into this because in addition to the formal modules that we present on personality, sometimes it's useful to just step back. So I like just to have a wing it, as we call it. Let's wing it and just step back and say,
fly by the seat.
What's the value of this stuff and where does it fit and what are our opinions on it and how does it help us when we're working with individuals and organisations on development, like leadership development, personal development. And when it comes to individual differences, those two words, if we step back, are limitless. So, you like wearing shirts with collars. I'm wearing a grandad vest. You like sporting a beard. I like to be clean shaved. That's a preference. So individual differences are really to do with preferences, but they're also biological. So, where were you born? What language do you speak? What's your sexual preferences? How do you identify yourself? What's your past experiences which make the person you are? Because the personality of a person is a big, wholesome, holistic thing. And even Carl Jung fears the reductionism on bringing it down to a few adjectives and a few words. So I support that. Bringing people into boxes and associating words with a person, I think can be limiting.
But people like that, right? So a lot of people like that. I'm a box label, whatever it might be, whether it's an INFP or whether it's a colour or whatever it might be.
Extrovert, introvert.
People like to say, it's almost like part of my identity. I can identify with this thing. So people like those labels sometimes. So I guess whilst there's the element of we shouldn't put people in boxes and you should think about yourself in a little bit more of a holistic way than trying to limit yourself to the performance of your category, your box, your type, whatever it might be. Some people do like that kind of thing. So I think there's elements of why is it that we like those kind of categorizations sometimes? But anyway, yes, I digress slightly.
No, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, why do we like doing a personality profile test and getting a profile back? Well,
I think, I'll say in some cases, many of these are self-report, right? So it's interesting, especially if it's a self-report test, in that people are doing these self-reports and they're putting information in about themselves, and then they're getting this confirmation back to say, this is who you are. Shocker. It comes back to say, you are who you just said you were. And it gives you a nice label. So there's a problem there, I guess, in self-report. And we do know, and we'll probably talk a little bit about branching away from just self-report, looking at things like observer reports, 360s and those kinds of things. But there's an element of that confirmation of this assessment tells me what I know about myself. And you get that confirmation from a psychological point of view. That makes me feel good because I know I am who I am, and it kind of reinforces my identity in some way. And I think that's why in some cases where you do have some more objective elements, when you have things like observer report, when some of those things are questioned and brought in, it can be more of a painful experience, but more of a developmental experience if you're willing to go there, where you're willing to look at different sides and say, well, like, you're actually not as agreeable, or you are more neurotic than you thought you were. These are types that we're talking about within certain models. But yeah, so it is interesting. I think there's that element of, especially with self-report only tests, in that it just confirms your own understanding of your identity, which makes you feel good. So I think that's why some people like it, and prevents them from doing certain jobs that they'd rather not do, because they can say, I'm I'm this, therefore
Well, it can
I
be
don't
used
need
as
to do
an
that.
excuse for not doing stuff, can't
Exactly,
it?
yeah.
And it's that's the way I am. You know, it's almost concrete, and I'm staying in my comfort zone, which is a little bit arrogant and selfish.
Yeah.
And because if you know if that's the type, we used to do a lot of work with leadership teams using Belbin. So Belbin's team styles had 9 different team types, and one was a coordinator, like a chairperson, and another one was completer finisher. So if I come out as a chairperson, but I'm not so much a completer finisher, yeah, I can chair all the meetings and give all the work out because I'm not very good at. I've done the test. You know, I'm not very good at completing and finishing stuff, doing stuff. You know, and getting the job done. You are. You know, you can do this because this is your style and type.
Yeah.
So that kind of self-labeling as a reason to do or not do stuff troubles me a little bit. Because that's almost at the basic level of how some personality tests can be used. And the way they're assessed, like you say, you've got self, peer report, like feedback from others, and then you've got like what could be a behavioural event interview, where you're interviewed on topics so that a specialist can decide what category you fit in. And on the self-report, there's another challenge because some of them are extreme, so it's either or, and it's not a continuum, where others use the Likert scale, so you've got a bit of a continuum. So there's all sorts of
introverted
things.
or you're extroverted. Being one example.
Either or, And the fact if it was a +5 scale and a -5 scale, or +5 towards extroversion, +5 towards introversion, I might be +1, but I'm then labelled extrovert, whereas somebody else might be a +5 and they're labelled with the same label. Because you just get 4 letters from 16 letters, ENTJ, INFP. That's good if you want to be a CEO, or that's good if you want to be a coach. And that kind of...
Now, this is an example from the Myers-Briggs
This is
type
Myers-Briggs,
indicators that we're talking about here.
So there's 16 letters that combine and you get 4.
Yeah.
And they're absolutes. And then, like you say, I filled in a questionnaire and I've ticked these words because it's lexical. It's to do with words. You tick words or phrases that you like or you think represent yourself, and you go through those, and then it gives you back a summary of the things you've ticked as a big word with maybe a paragraph. And so this is what you are. Well, you know, no shit, Sherlock. I've just give you those words. You've just given them me back, paraphrased. So of course I'm going to like them, and that's back to what you were saying, the likability of the test and why it's a £500 million industry is because I'm getting something back, and that bias is confirming the way I view myself. But I've now got an official stamp and a badge I can put on my chest to be like that, and that can be troublesome. But this heuristic, this shortcut, this label of describing a huge personality in a word or a combination of words has got its uses. Because if we want to look at behaviour, the way people think, the way people approach the world, and they're having difficulty, say it could be an emotional or a personality trait that's actually contaminating the way they see the world, almost a disorder. So you've got personality traits and disorders. A disorder is a filter. So I'm filtering in the world through my own lens of my bias. And if someone is doing that and they're filtering in information that distorts the reality, that can be challenging for them. And therefore, to give people that feedback, that are you aware that you actually have got these preferences, traits, biases, habits that perpetuate over time in different contexts, and they affect your behaviour, your language, your decision making, the way you interact with others, sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in a non-pro-social way. That awareness can be valuable because Robbie Burns, all the gift the gears to see yourself as others see us. So I'd love to see myself as other people see me. And if I can't get a direct feedback from a mate I trust, then these questionnaires are like a weaker alternative maybe, because there's no human deep knowledge. It's a tick in a box. So they give you back something this is how you come across, and the value of that may help with therapy, with support, with medications, especially in the disorder category. But in a general sense, it troubles me that they're used for defending a comfort zone, because that's I'm going to use probably a negative word here. That's lazy. So if I want to be lazy, I can't be bothered coming out of my comfort zone. I don't want to make the effort to. So say you're an introvert and I'm an extrovert. I can't be bothered reframing this idea and concept that I've got, and I want to bounce around with people because that's the way I work as an extrovert. I can't be bothered converting this to a piece of paper so you can go away and read it because you like digesting stuff in your own time, reading, absorbing, and then coming back so we can interact and have a meaningful conversation. If I can't be bothered, then I'll stay as an extrovert, and regardless of your preferences.
You have to come to me. There's no bridge building. You're not willing to.
No. So if there's any bridge building, you've got to do it from your side, because I've had this psychological test, this psychometric test, and it's legitimised me being like this, and therefore I'm going to stay like this because it's got good features.
And I think there's an element there, and it kind of also feeds into, if you look at. So right now we're talking about things like extroversion stuff. So you look at the big five, for example. We've got that openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And there's an element of value judgments being attributed to some of this kind of stuff as well in a lot of these tests as well. And I think there's a misinterpretation of some of the say. So it's better to be more openness, for example, better to be more open to experience than not. So someone's low
more
on
agreeable,
this, or be more
unless
agreeable,
you're in a court,
or be more conscientious. So yes, we can all say that in many contexts, conscientiousness is a good thing, and we can probably say openness to experience is a good thing. But there are times
neurotic is neurotic good?
Neuroticism. Well, it's. I guess if you need to be more aware and more. Your fear should be heightened, and you should be more. I don't even like that word, but neurotic. But your anxiety level should be is a good thing if you're in a threat environment. If you're in the military and you're in an environment, if you're in a survival environment, then you probably do need to have that heightened level of anxiety, fear, and all those kind of things, because they're going to save you. They're evolved to help us in those sort of situations. Yes, if you're in a board meeting. And everyone's speaking, you probably don't want to be a quivering wreck in the corner of the boardroom. So again, it's about that dynamic nature of a lot of these things, and who's labelling these good or bad, and in what context. Context is everything. We say it a lot, and so yes, the better thing about Big Five is it is a spectrum. It's not binary characteristics like things like the Myers-Briggs. But there's still an element of this value judgment, like it's better to be an extrovert or an introvert. Introverts are far more considered and they think and they take times, whereas an extrovert is just going to go. Oh. But if you're going to be a performer or something, then maybe that extroverted nature is great in that moment, but that extrovert still needs to be introverted sometimes, and take time for themselves and not need that external stimulation. So. That's the difficulty we have.
On Ocean, the Big Five, or the five-factor model, I think it was Merck who did some research in 2007 and said you need to be low in this, high in this, high in this, high in this, high in this, and put that forward as a general personality as being a favourable, positive state to have. In other words, there are right and wrong answers. Now, anyone administering a personality type tool, like sometimes we will use the Carl Jungian functional types, which is the thinker, intuitor, sensor, feeler. Now, just as an example of how people might perceive the world, make decisions, and process information. And in that, if you're a thinker or intuitor, thinker interested in facts and logic, intuitor interested in concepts and big ideas, then those are technically opposites, but they're not right or wrong. But they may be useful in certain situations.
Yeah.
So the attention to facts and detail as a thinker could be valuable if you're analysing a spreadsheet. If you're brainstorming ideas for a business, then maybe flexing over to the intuitor style is a strength. But so many of the proponents and the administrators of the tools say, you can use this to recruit. I think that's illegal. You know, if you fire someone from an organisation based on their personality, especially when most tools, even Ocean, the Big Five, are preempted with there's no right or wrong, it's just differences, and yet you see the value-laden words which form the structure of the prompts within it and the overall descriptions. That worries me, and that's a conflict. So, is there a pro-social positive profile in Ocean to get? And of course, those administrators say no. But when you read the language and you see the way they describe it, especially where they've come from too, because they've come through. It was the neuroticism and extroversion. It started with 2, and then there's something missing.
Openness.
Let's add openness. Openness came third. That's the neo. And then it was, version 1, 2. So it's not theoretically based. The research is good that this was not theoretically based, the Ocean model. It evolved through time, and different researchers added bits. Yeah. And you can check the literature for that. It's quite clear. In fact, I've just, in preparation for this, this Maltby book's quite good, and that is very, very clear on the evolution of the 5-factor model. It's come through. Somebody else dipped the toe in, put openness in, and then we put the other 2 in, and then we'll describe them differently. And then we don't like the word neuroticism, so we'll call that emotionality, and we'll add honesty and humble.
And then some people don't say neuroticism, even if they're using the Big Five. They say emotional stability rather than neuroticism, because they don't like neuroticism. So it's been shifted a lot, right? And it won't. And it will continue to do so, even from the Ocean and the Big Five. We've now got the Hexaco. Well, that's the one that's made the modifications. So where's that come from? Yeah, so you've got this humility, honesty and humility being added, and then the...
So just take that one. Yeah. Honesty and humility. Is it a good thing, to be honest? Humility.
It depends.
Oh, come on.
Well, it depends. I mean,
so I'd rather you be deceitful to me as a member of my leadership team, unless you're playing poker.
Yeah, because that in that it's a strength to be deceptive, right? If you're playing Werewolf or Traitors, great TV show. If you're playing that, then it is a positive thing to be deceptive. And then let's not go down the white lie argument, because we'll go on for a long period of time. But are white lies, useful? They are social lubricant, as we say, but
and as we know, the definition of a lie is a deliberate attempt to mislead. So do you convey information that you believe to be true to others? So a sincere attempt to provide accurate information. Do we do that all the time? Well, marketeers don't. Sometimes
we don't always say how we feel. I mean, that's a good example. Because I don't want to burden you with how I feel today, so I say I feel great. I'm being deceptive.
Social lubricant.
Yeah, social lubricant. So, but I think honesty and humility being added is again, we're moving into these kind of value judgments about things, and context not taking part in that. And then they moved. The neuroticism, and it became the emotionality, I think, in Hexaco. And then extroversion was the X of the Hexaco model. Then they kept some other things. And then even a more prominent one, so in the working world, in corporate world, in that more organisational area, you've got things like Hogan. And the Hogan assessment was still predominantly based on that Big Five concept. And then they've added things to it with social cultural elements. And put in, so it still has its roots back then from the 80s, but it's still based on that. Goes back to Cattell, and then all of those things that have been filtered down to these Big Five. Yeah, and
from 4,500 words. That's how it started.
4,500
words. A brainstorm. 4,500 adjectives.
Yeah.
Let's try and distill it into. I think it went to 36, and then how can you get this as comprehensive? And the critics against the Big Five are it's not comprehensive.
Yeah.
It doesn't cover everything, and it's value laden.
Yeah.
But so many people are holding the banner up there. This is theoretically based. No, it was not theoretically contrived and designed. It's been retrofitted. People after the fact have used experiments to try and justify the theoretical nature of the model, but it's not theoretically based.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we talk a lot about these tools. MBTI having far more criticism for its lack of validity and reliability, because it was designed on it was designed predominantly had its basis in Jungian kind of psychology, which was what the Briggs, Isabel Briggs and
not even a psychologist,
but they weren't psychologists. Yeah. They had no background in personality assessment, but they liked a bit of Jung, so they created what then became the MBTI, and there's very little good empirical evidence that backs up MBTI, but people love it. It's one of the most popular tools in the world. And then even with
before we move off that, have you seen stuff like Anne Murphy-Paul? I was looking at this the other day, and have you seen the?
You've got a cheeky grin on your face. What are you about to say?
No, this caught my eye. I think I was going through Amazon or whatever, and it's The Cult of Personality Testing by Annie Murphy-Paul.
Good book.
What year was this? 2005, the first paperback. So it's 20 years old. But there's a couple of statements in here which we may not actually support or agree with. But the first line gets me. She says, "Hello, nice to meet you. Please allow me to tell you who you are." Yeah. And this is the perspective of a personality tester. In other words, you don't know who you are. I've got my half-rimmed spectacles on. I've got a questionnaire here.
Not that you're stereotyping at this point, but okay.
No. I want you to. It's just the image I've got with a profiler. So you fill this in, you give it me back. The computer crunches it, or I put HP pencil on and put it through a scanner, or I just add it up manually like in the olden days, or it's online in an instant. But I get these, not just these 5 bar graphs, but I get these 125 pages, which the geeks behind the tool have managed to, put that with that and create a subgraph, that with that to show, actually, you're high on this, low on this, which means that let's do some interpretation and add something to it. But don't give it to the student. Don't give it to the student. Give it to the profiler with the half-rim spectacles so they can show them how clever they are. And this is cynical, but that's a practice which I'm uncomfortable with. Yeah. Because we're in the business of developing people. That's creating independence. Yeah. If we create dependence on an outside being to do a readout or an interpretation of your profile, just give it them with enough detail for them to interpret themselves and then come to you for help. I've got a principle that sticks on that.
I guess if it's a 120-page report or something, though, that's a little bit much to give someone to absorb. So you do need someone to help facilitate. But I agree.
Maybe that's part of the tactic.
And
that's why it's a £500 million industry.
It could be. And we do sound like we're beating up a little bit on assessment tools at the moment, but they are a useful administrative heuristic. They can be useful to go. Okay, they can be useful tools to help people. Think about, okay, what kinds of preferences do these people have? What kinds of abilities, traits? And I think we do need to separate abilities, traits, preferences, what we mean by those. We have mentioned it a few times. But the thing is, there's a lot said about these tools, and there's a lot of commercial bias in that because everyone's using MBTI, everyone uses MBTI. Because everyone talks about Big Five, everyone talks about Big Five, and everyone uses that within their research, because everyone does research using the Big Five. Or Hogan's in a work-based environment. Hogan's is very expensive and is typically done at an organisational level, and it's based on the Big Five, and it's got a lot of scientific validity and reliability. But I've looked at a lot of those papers on which they talk about that kind of validity and reliability and job performance and how it accurately predicts outcomes in organisational settings, and it ranges. So yes, it's predictive, but I've seen some that talk about academic performance and looking at Big Five, and it's strongly correlated 0.1, 0.2 as a Pearson's R. Now yes, there's a correlation, but it's small to moderate at best in some of these cases. And then in some cases, yes, you're higher up. And if you take it all as a meta review, then you might say, okay, yes, there is a strong correlation, and you could argue that it is predictive. But if you look at the individual, in some cases it performs really badly with academic performance and job performance. And in some cases it does. Now, is that because you're measuring people in that role, and shockingly those people in that role fall into that category, and so yes, it is predictive that people at higher performance within that role score highly, but there's potentially some methodological bias in some of that as well with regards to the population you're sampling. But
Well,
anyway.
does it predict behaviour? I believe it does. I think Eysenck said it's 2/3 biological, it's genetic, where others argue it's a lot more context and experience based and environment. That's not an area we can go into, but there is recognition that there's a genetic and an experiential impact on personality. And some argue that your personality is set by the age of 7. Some say it's 30, and then no, it's there's very little agreement on is your personality changeable, and of course your behaviour is changeable, which may fit differently with the personality profile you had before because you're doing some work on it. In other words, I've recognised my preferences because I've never had it distilled this way before. So if you've never done that kind of self-reflection and you're not a reflective self-learner developer, or you've not had access to a coach, for example, I've never had that played back to me. I didn't realise I operate as an extrovert, as a thinker most of the time. So in terms of predicting the behaviour of an individual, those patterns of response can give us some information about ourselves and others. Because when it comes down to you've got the whole person, the holistic personality. I don't believe there is a personality test. I'll put it on the table. There isn't one. There's nothing that can holistically measure the whole person. There are some tools which draw out, using words, some of the aspects and heuristics. Then you've got the traits, which are subsets of personality. And traits, basically all the tools we see are populated with traits. And preferences and things which fall underneath. Then you've got things like maybe habits. But the trait, let me just, there's a definition here which I thought was quite good. This comes from the DSM manual.
Yep.
So the
Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
That's the one. And it says a trait is a tendency to feel, perceive, behave, and think in relatively consistent ways across time and situations. That's important, the situations bit. Across time and situations in which the trait might manifest. So in other words, if I see you behave this way in this situation, in this context, I can be fairly sure that if that's recreated, you're going to behave in the same way. So in other words, you're predictable. Because you're in that groove. And you're fixed with your badge on. Whereas the real value of trait is if I can know my preference, insight, and then I can recognise your preference, and I don't need you to fill a questionnaire in to know your characteristics and your shortcuts and your biases and preferences and habits. If I'm interested and caring enough to engage meaningfully with you, I'll work out what your styles and preferences are, and I'll suspend mine, and I'll build a bridge from my side and connect on your channel. And if I do that, it's more likely to be a constructive conversation and probably more helpful, whether you choose to flex to mine or not. So I think knowing how we come across in terms of our biases, and they are biases, they're preferences, nothing more. So they get hammed up. It's just a preference and a bias, maybe even a prejudice that can cause us to be lazy and ineffective at moving out of that rut. So if we can recognise that and see when it's not appropriate, the time and situation, and then flex it to connect in how I should interact right now, how I should think right now, how I should behave right now, then that can be constructive. So its value is knowing yourself and helping you to flex.
Yeah.
Now, some people say it's good for team building or team working as well.
Yeah.
So on a team, you want a high extrovert, high introvert, high thinker, high intuitor, and it'll be a nightmare to manage. But you've got people come from different planets, and you're likely to get inputs as long as you let them speak from those perceptives. Or
Perspectives.
Perspectives is the word.
That's the word.
Yeah. So again, that's lazy, and it's not developmental. What would be more developmental is to provide opportunities for people to exercise their non-preferred styles.
Yeah.
So it's like if I was in a gym and say I want to lift heavy weights, I want to be stronger because I keep damaging my back as well. I've probably got, let me think about this. It's a good analogy. I've probably got 4 options. I can go in the gym and work on my biceps and make sure that if I'm picking something up, I pick it up with my biceps.
Yep.
I might even develop my torso, so my back muscles.
The core's very important.
And the core, when you're picking something up, and develop my core. So if I develop my core and my back muscles, then really I can leave my arms dangling and let my back and my torso do the work, especially if I work on my legs. So if I can work on my legs and use my legs with a stiff core, my arms can be like straw. As long as I can grip, I should be able to pick up a heavy weight. So by having a preference, it's saying I've got big biceps, and a 6-pack and a good back, but I've got chicken legs.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to look a little bit odd, but if
We've
you
seen
ever
those people at the beach.
if you ever come to a situation where you're in a tight space and you can't use your arms and your back, you may have to use your legs. So if the context changes, you need to be an all-rounder, so you've got the capability to flex to use my legs if I have to. Now, if you've not been exercising your thinker style and you're faced with a thinker challenge that you can't fix any other way, you're knackered.
You are. And I think this is one of I think understanding the vocabulary of these types of assessments is really useful. Understanding the perspectives of these things is very, very useful. And it's really important in our field, from a behaviour analysis and emotional intelligence point of view, is understand what people mean when they say they are an INFP or whatever it is they might say. What do they mean by that? You need to kind of get that, because it gives you a sense of, especially if they're proud of it. It's like, I'm a whatever they are. And I think it's very, very useful, but I really don't care. I'm going to take people on face value. We talk about getting baseline and all those kind of things. So in most of the work that we do, especially if we're doing video analysis work, in some senses of video, it doesn't come with a personality profile attached to it. So it doesn't really matter. We're going to judge based on behavior. Now, if I'm in an organizational context, yes, again, it might be an administrative heuristic to say, okay, well, this person probably isn't going to work well with that person initially. So maybe that's a route for development work. How can we develop this team to be more holistic and work better as a team? So we need to raise these people up because they're less effective in this area or because of this particular preference. And we can start to do that as long as it's developmental and it's not you're this, therefore you can't do that job, or you're this, therefore you're more suited to that job. You do elements of that, I get it, but there should always be a developmental factor. So if you're coaching, I see the importance of that. And so some of these models are very useful in coaching to help people understand their own personal biases and preferences and stuff. But for me, I'm interested. I've gone through these things. I've done the big 5 and stuff and gone, oh, that's interesting. That's shocker. That is me. But it doesn't really add anything to it. I think, well, maybe I should be less agreeable. Maybe I should be more, well, definitely not more open to experience, because I'm a magpie, I go after everything, but maybe I should be more neurotic. So it's interesting to see some of these things reflected back at you and go, yes, that's me. I'm looking in a mirror and shocker, I see me. So it is interesting. And it from a shadow work point of view, coming back to Jung and thinking about that kind of, but what are those things that I'd rather not confront? Things that I am, quite I'm not argumentative, but if I am really argumentative, why am I argumentative, and how is that impacting my world, my role, my potential, my employability, my career progression, whatever it might be. And do I want to do anything about that, or am I quite happy to stay as I am and crack on, and who cares about everybody else? Yeah. So it's interesting to understand personality psychology, individual differences, preferences, biases, prejudices. Obviously, those kinds of things are very important to be very aware of. And I still think it all comes back to emotional intelligence, seamless link, but I still think it comes down to that self-awareness. Yes, being self-aware is really important about all of these things, so that you can manage or develop those things, so that you can understand other people in a social awareness point of view and work well with other people from a kind of social interaction point of view. So it all still comes back to emotional intelligence.
It's a good point. And what's reassuring is I was looking at the DSM. This is DSM-4. The DSM-5's out now. So basically a classification, as you know, of the scoring systems to decide whether someone has a disorder or not, or where they are on the spectrum. So whether it's antisocial personality disorder or whatever. And having that, again, many of them are scoring matrices with individual characteristics, and then 0, 1, 2 scoring. And if you're above this score, you're a psychopath, or you fit on the hair scale.
That's the test you've done, right?
That's the test I've done. Yeah, I'm a psychopath. Yeah, in terms of I think I scored 17 out of 40 on the hair scale, and
again, mirror reflecting back
as honestly as I can. Yeah, so I am competitive, and put me in on a judo mat, in a dojo, and I want to win because it's the culture and the context of the
In fairness, nobody ever scores 0 on the HARES checklist, for example, of psychopathy, do they? So it's a spectrum. Yeah. You're just slightly higher on that spectrum. Carry on.
That's a judgment. I thought I was okay with 17.
Carry on.
But in the DSM-5 at the back, for those who are interested, they can look at the future development. So DSM-6, the manual which psychiatrists and psychologists use to actually have some consistency in their evaluation of disorders and conditions and emotions. I was reassured because it came up with towards the back of the book, with this idea that we're going to have, it's about whether you can function with the disorder that you've been diagnosed with. So they're relegating the disorders to like stage 2. Yeah. And in stage 1, guess what it is?
What is it?
It's emotional intelligence. It's not defined as that, but it's are you self-aware and
so
able?
Shocked.
Shock horror. If the person is self-aware and able to regulate their own emotions, if the person is receptive to the indicators coming from other people and has empathy and an ability to interact with that person, I'm paraphrasing from the 4 elements that are in the first 2 paragraphs of this chapter on what's coming next, DSM-6. If they're able to do that, then this is far, far, far more important. So if they've got those abilities, and let's be clear, an ability is right and wrong. Have they got the knowledge, understanding and skills to do this? You can test that. Can they fly an aeroplane? Well, we'd have to check they've got the knowledge, understanding. Have they got the skill? Can they work on the simulator? And then can they actually transfer that to a plane with 256 human beings at the back as a co-pilot before we let them have the command of the aircraft? Yeah. So that kind of transition of knowledge, understanding, skills, application, performance is a journey of development based on right, wrong. There's some right and wrong things to do in an aircraft. There are some right and wrong things to do when you interact with a human being in terms of emotional intelligence. And it's taken a long while to get to what the right and wrong answers are in emotional intelligence, because there's a lot of theories and perceptions. But as part of our work, as you know, we managed to nail that down. Yeah. So if you've got the abilities, then what you can do is, no matter what genetic, biological, or environmental, because who knows what postcode or what parents you're going to be born to. So when you come up in that culture and that environment, if half of that is actually in your genes, again, half up for debate, and half of that is how you interact with the environment, your siblings and schoolmates and parents and so on, then if within that you've got a clinical disorder. So let's take something like, I was talking to someone last week about this. You're on the autism spectrum disorder, ASD. So say someone is on that spectrum in terms of autism. It could be that if you've got these knowledge, emotions, these knowledge, understanding skills, and you've been clinically diagnosed as having autism, you're on the spectrum, whatever. Sometimes it depends on who's doing the assessment. It's a level 1, 2, 3. So you're level 3, which has a high impact on the way you interact and think with others. Then if you've got this emotional intelligence up front, it almost helps you to handle that condition. So if I've got that condition and I'm born with it, if I've got the emotional intelligence, I can still function, I can be high functioning with that classification or that badge that I've been given by a psychiatrist or a book.
I think, yeah, because you can go even further than that now. So we talk about neurodiversity, such as people on the autistic spectrum disorder, and a lot of we don't even really talk too much about disorders these days, because you see it as, yes, if you've got somebody, and time again, I've spoken to people that once they have a diagnosis to say they are ADD, ADHD, or Asperger's, or high functioning autism, whatever it might be, everything starts to make sense, because you have some level of, okay, it all makes sense now. Why I've had these, so you see, so it all makes sense, and then the lifestyle comes together, and I think there's elements,
and it gets you access to resources.
At that point, it's not a disorder, because then you just play into strengths. So people, we talk about conditions and disorders and autism and all this stuff, but if you talk about neurodiversity, the fact that these people they are neurodiverse, slightly different in the way that the brain is functioning, but it has some mad strengths, better than, for doing some of the stuff that we do. There is some mad strengths in there, so embracing those strengths and being aware of it, again, coming into that kind of element of, I'm aware, I can manage where it is a problem, I understand how it impacts other people from a social point of view, and because I know this, I know how to manage things in order to work more effectively with other people. It's no longer a disorder or a condition, it is a strength that really does help them with very, very specific roles. So I think disorder is
a terrible word.
Is a terrible word.
It's a condition.
And yes, it's historic. So we've always talked about things like that, but I think the whole movement in neurodiversity and stuff and embracing that is really important. And a big part of that is the awareness, which is a good thing about the diagnosing disorders, so that you get the awareness and then you turn that disorder, condition, whatever you want to call it, into a strength. And you hear it time and time again for people we know personally that say, oh yeah, I was diagnosed this 5 years ago and it's been brilliant ever since, because that self-awareness and the ability to manage it appropriately just opened so many doors and explained everything for them. So, and I think, that's...
Well, this happened as we're both governors for educational establishments. I help out with a K through 12 or 4-year-old to 11-year-old school. And we're a state school, so it's state funded, not a private school. And the teachers and the teaching assistants have got classes of 30. And we've got diversity, which is so wide amongst those children. Different cultures, some where English is their first language and so on. And some have been clinically diagnosed. Now, what the diagnosis does, and so I'm not against the work of those who do assessment on neurodiversity, really, for example, because once that's recognised for the child and the parent or the carer and for the school, it helps to make sense of why this person needs more structure than this person. Why does this person not interact well or maintain eye contact with others? Why have they got no friends? Or why are they over-friendly? And sometimes it can help with again, it's a shortcut, but we've got to be careful because it's a spectrum. Person here and person here needs the reasonable adjustments you need to make for person A are completely different from person B, even though they've been diagnosed on the same spectrum. And so in our school, the mantra is every individual matters. It's not about the shoot for the average of the class. It's what does that individual need? And you're this professional as a teacher. And if you've not been trained well enough, it's our fault as governors, we to help you. So you need to understand the signs, the signals, the symptoms, you need to understand how that impacts on their happiness and learning and interaction, because we're preparing them, we're making them high school ready, and then high school is making them world ready for usually the world of work. So we've got a job to do, and if we aren't recognising and individualising the curriculum to that person, we're not doing them a good service.
No.
And that's what's driving us, as you know, on let's get emotional intelligence into the 4-year-olds.
Yeah.
So that whatever they're born with, whatever happens to them in life, we've given them the tools so that they can handle the personal emotion recognition regulation and the recognition of what's going on for the other person and how I can interact constructively with them. Because if they've got those tools in the toolbox, then that doesn't remove any condition they're born with, but it can help compensate for the effects of the condition in situations and contexts where it doesn't fit.
Yeah, yeah. And shout out to all those people that do work in SEN work, so the educational needs in schools in those cases, because they do some fantastic work.
It's amazing to watch.
It's fantastic, and it's awesome. And I think that there's a huge crossover then, coming back into individual differences, personality. A lot of this stuff is probably modelled on neurotypical populations as well. So there's not as much research on looking at personality traits, preferences, and stuff in a neurodiverse population.
That's a good point.
It would be interesting to see
what's
more
the data,
research.
what's the data set?
What's the data set? Because it's typically modelled on a neurotypical, I'd rather say that than normal, I guess. But
all those words, typical and normal.
Neurotypical, none of these words are great. But yeah, from an academic point of view, I guess it's interesting to see that the history and where it's going to go now. Well, now we're embracing more neurodiversity in the population. Should there be more research done in these areas on individual differences of personality and everything, looking at the demographic a bit more widely, being more inclusive of neurodiversity as well. Yeah. So.
Now, there's a few books here and a few things knock the personality trait measures, but there's also quite a lot of support, and obviously the financial figures justify the industry that's been created. And I know that you can smell the cynicism in my language, but sometimes we've got to step back from that. And I did this with Derren Brown. I don't know if you saw the episode. Derren Brown, I can tell when people are lying and when they're faking it, and I'm a magician and a hypnotist and all this. He's done some good stuff. However, I didn't like the episode where he went to a seaside town in the UK, Blackpool it was, and he was analysing this group of psychics. And he was interviewing the psychics and this group. And in the end, he said, this is a load of crap. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. In other words, there's no such thing. Well, what you're doing is you're co-reading. So you're asking people questions, and then you're fishing and pulling their language together, and then presenting stuff back to them, which you've either researched on the web beforehand, which some people were doing, and he proved that, or they're co-reading and either leading and influencing the language or drawing language from the individual. And if you was a black and white, I think he's on the autistic spectrum, by the way, because of his lack of empathy to that group. That's another thing. But because of that that judgment, he's destroying something that works for those individuals. It's like if you question a belief, like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, if you can go into that as a scientist and prove, well, where is this deity? Where does it happen? If you come in with scientific evidence to try and dismiss a belief system, which could be religious, it could be to do with psychics, horoscopes, or personality profiles. If you go in and mash them up and destroy them with scientific evidence, that's not very nice. Because if it's a difficult world, and if someone has found a belief system or a model or a process that helps them to deal with the world, and they're not being manipulated by other people, then what right have we to pour water on their belief. So if someone finds great help and store in a personality profile, we've got to be careful that we don't become smart asses and whip it down, because we're empathic human beings. If we could find a way to, for those who want it, to people to flex the styles, but we took a group of students to, when I was back in engineering days, I was working at a college. We took a group of students to Kellogg's cornflake factory, and we went to the back of the factory, and there was a guy there, and he was sat like this next to a conveyor belt, and he had a stick with a carefully shaped rubber dome on the end that he'd stitched in really, really well. And his job was, as the cornflake packets came past, if the lid wasn't glued properly, he'd grab his stick, he'd knock the box onto the conveyor belt going the other way or at the back to take the box back into the gluing room so it could be glued. And the students were saying, well, that looks boring. He said, no, I'm dead happy. This is great. I can do my job. I don't have any bosses mithering me. And he was really happy and contented in his work. He didn't, if you said, well, you're a thinker, intuitor, I don't care. I don't need to flex my style in this job. So unless there's an emergency or he loses his job, which is a different story. Again, what right have we to say, you need to be able to flex your style? So if your context is static and your personality suits it, and it's a job you love, and you like being you, and you like your bias, and it works for your organisation or your own business or your life, if you're not in a work environment, then why change?
Exactly. I think it's if you want to flex your style, if you want to try on something different, if you think, okay, this is how I typically act, this is how I typically behave in these concepts, but I'd like to see what happens if I don't. What happens if I go into a room? Usually I'm shy and retiring, and I'm going to go in and try and be the life of the party and crack some jokes and stuff like that. Sometimes it goes horribly wrong when you do things like that. But maybe you want to learn about other styles. Maybe you want to try and model other people and think like, I want to look as charismatic as Tony Robbins or whoever it might be.
There you go.
And so you want to try and how that feels, and it might make a difference. It might make you feel great, and understanding the language of various perspectives of individual differences in personality, preferences, traits, and all those things is valuable in that it helps us to understand that we're all very different, and give us the option to look at other styles and go, why don't I behave in that way? Why do I behave in this way? And do I need to? And maybe I can flex and go that way. Pigeonholing is never a good idea, and recruiting solely, you're going to miss a lot of things if you just recruit solely on an assessment. I would assume no one is going to do that, though, that it's just going to be based on an assessment. But
it's going back to the gym analogy. I mean, it's clear that you don't use the gym, and you might not prefer to use the gym because, unlike me. But that's
whatever. The way you just demonstrated using a gym a few minutes ago questioned whether you'd ever been in one in your life. But
we don't all have to be hooks like I am.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, let's wrap this up. So I think the individual differences, it's fantastic to investigate these, and long may it continue that we do lots of research into individual differences, personality, biases, all those kinds of things, because it does give us a better understanding of the differences that we have within the human population. But we always want those differences. We don't want everybody to be conscientious and agreeable and emotionally stable, not neurotic, the other way around. So we don't want everybody to be this kind of pool of the same people. The differences are what help us going forwards. And just having that understanding and self-awareness so that we can manage and style flex when we need to, being aware of other people and maybe flexing to their style, or don't try and help them understand themselves, unless you're that facilitator with that particular tool and that's your job to do that, or you think that's your job to do that. And then working well with other people. So again, bringing it back to the emotional intelligence, understanding this area helps us to be more emotionally intelligent individuals, in my personal opinion. That's my final word for today.
And my final word is probably remain cynical and sceptical, because there are a lot of flaws in the personality world. But don't become an asshole like I described Darren Brown. Sometimes you can be too smart, and what gives you the right to dictate someone needs to change? What gives you the right to force change on others? Unless it's your job and there's a severe problem in an organisation and you're the HR manager or the coach. So, is it your job? So why are you going there? But remain, step back every now and again and just don't get swallowed up with the market and the industry of personality testing.
Excellent, thank you. I look forward to Darren Brown's rebuttal of that comment.
I look forward to you coming to the gym with me.
Thank you very much. We'll see you again next time. Have yourself a fantastic 2025 and we'll see you at the next episode.